Hey there, everyone. This is Gregg Schutze for Draft.com, and this is the Ready for the Draft podcast, pre-Combine edition. That's right, just a couple of weeks away for the NFL Combine inside Lucas Oil Stadium in Indianapolis. 337 players have received their Combine invites. Now, no, we're not going to go ahead and cover all 337 players in one podcast. That would just be insane. So we're going to divide things up. If you've watched the Combine before, they start with the offense, and then they move on to the defense. So we're going to talk offense this week. We'll move on to the defense next week, and then subsequent podcasts will actually break down the results of the Combine. What I really want to do is take a look at each position by position, really kind of how it's been laid out at the Combine. So we'll talk running backs first, offensive line, quarterbacks, receivers, tight ends, really what to expect. Obviously, you've got the big names, what we're looking for there out of some of them. Who are the guys with the most to prove? Guys that are really going to have to show out when they're running the 40, maybe the vertical leap, bench press, some of the drills, interviews, medicals, things like that. Who's going to fly under the radar? You're going to have some workout warriors that, obviously are going to jump out. We're going to identify some of them, and really just some of the guys that you figure will be breakout guys that'll actually, if nothing else, send the coaches, the scouts back to watch more game film. What you see out here at the Combine, in their heads when they're there at Lucas Oil, what I'm seeing out here on the field, is that also translating to game speed? Is all this the power, the ability to make these cuts on some of these routes without any pads on, does that translate to game speed? Does that translate that route? Are they able to run that crisp route in the game? What do I see? Then that's really what they're going to be doing, is validating what they see there at the Combine. So is it necessarily going to completely impact things? No. But it is one of those things where they're going to either verify what they've already and validate what they've already seen on tape. And some of the guys that'll surprise them, it'll send them back to watch even more tape, really do, their homework and study guys to really make sure that they're really getting a full picture on what they're looking at in a prospect. So 174 players on offense. There are actually 12 special teams players. We'll fit them in. Don't know if we'll have time this episode, but we'll fit in the special teams. They usually go with the running backs and the offensive line. And then next podcast, we'll talk about the 151 defensive players. So we'll take a look at that, see where everyone falls. So we've got a lot to cover in one podcast, all of the offense. So we're going to go ahead and jump into things right away. And the running back position. The running back position is, traditionally one of the first that you're going to see. You're usually going to see the offensive line probably go first, and then the running backs. But running backs are usually going to be day one. And really what I want to do is really compare what we're going to be seeing with last year's draft class. We've already seen what last year's draft class has done out on the football field. Josh Jacobs, a finalist for the Offensive Rookie of the Year. David Montgomery in Chicago, Devin Singletary with Buffalo, helping take them to the playoffs. Alexander Madison filling in there for Dalvin Cook in Minnesota. I thought he looked good. Miles Sanders for Philly looks like he's going to be a guy to stay. Tony Pollard contributing with Dallas, Pittsburgh, and Benny Snell. Those guys were day 3 picks sitting there in the 4th round. Guys that absolutely jumped out and made a difference. Myles Gaskin, a 7th round pick, he was getting playing time for Miami. He was the last running back selected in the draft, number 234 overall, and he was still getting some playing time. So study what we saw last year and really kind of compare that with the draft class that we have this year. So, when we're talking about the running backs, we actually have 30 running backs that'll be invited or that are invited to the Combine. So we're going to kind of take a look at some of them. We won't really be able to touch on and really break down everybody, but you'll have 30 running backs that'll be there. Last year, we had 31 Combine invites. 25 running backs were selected in the draft, and 20 of those 25 were at the Combine. 5 weren't invited. I thought the biggest snub out of that was Ty Johnson, who was a 6th-round pick of Detroit. He actually got quite a bit of playing time. Believe it or not, Darwin Thompson, who made an impact there in the Super Bowl, got to play a little bit. 6th-round pick of Kansas City. He wasn't invited to the combine. Cullen Gillespie, he's the fullback there out of Houston. He did not get a combine invite, yet he's there playing for the Texans. Got to play out, play in the playoffs. Kareth White out of Florida Atlantic, the backup to Devin Singletary. He went to the Bears, and then Chandler Cox, the do everything H-back, from Miami. He also was not invited to the combine, but those guys still got selected. So when you look at it, there were 6 running backs that were invited to the combine. That weren't drafted, that weren't a part of that class. And when you look at it, when you're studying things, obviously Elijah Holyfield, when you run a 40, 4.78 40, that really, doesn't really do any favors for you. Then you pull off a 29.5 inch vertical leap. Really doesn't offer any lower body explosiveness. He was a bigger back, big bodied running back, and just didn't really show that explosion that you're wanting to see out of a running back. I thought, James Williams, pass catcher, ran a 4.58, really expecting to see a little bit more out of him. LJ Scott ultimately retired. Jalen Moore of Appalachian State, he battled some injuries. He wasn't selected. Then you had Alex Barnes, the workout warrior, a guy who ran a 4.59, bench pressed 225, 34 times, 38.5 inch vertical leap, 6 foot 226. But it made you at least go back and look at the game film and study things a little bit. And he was one of those backs who, he had a breakout season, 1,300 yards, but looking at him, I wasn't sure that his game was going to translate. Ultimately didn't get drafted. And then Nick Brissett out of LSU ran a 4.72 40, only bench pressed 225 15 times. Just really didn't show off the athleticism that teams were expecting to see out of him. So those were the guys that weren't drafted. So when you look at a draft class, you're looking at things. Those are some of the metrics and some of the numbers that are going to jump out at you. And when you're studying it, you're really wanting to see what are you going to be expecting out of this. And so when I look at this year's draft or this year's combine group with the running backs, I think it's going to be exciting. I want to see, for example, TCU has 2 distinct running backs, right? You've got Darius Jet Anderson and you have Sewo Olanolua. And I'll tell you, with Jet Anderson, I'm excited to really see what he runs in the 40s. 5'11", 212. He's the same size, believe it or not, as Cam Akers. And Cam Akers gets a lot of hype there at Florida State, and rightfully so. I think, he really had a bounce back season. As a sophomore, only 706 yards, but able to get back to, over 1,100 yards. 30 receptions as well, showed off some more versatility, ability to run between the tackles and on the outside. But look, Darius Anderson, he's a legit pass catcher. And, he was sharing the backfield with Olanolua, but 22 receptions. And if you watched the Senior Bowl, this was a guy running those angle routes. He was leaving linebackers in his wake. I mean, it was really fun to watch. And so you have him, and then you have the bruiser. Olanolua is a big dude. He's 6'3", 240. Really want to see, how he measures out. 60 receptions in his career. Over 1,600 yards on the ground. He's that bigger bodied running back. Is he going to be a guy that we can put in on the short yardage? Is he going to be more of a fullback type? You look at a guy like Kadri Ollison, who was 6'1", 228, ran a 4.58 40. The bench press wasn't all that impressive. 19 reps at 225. For a bigger running back, you're expecting a little bit more. But with Ollison, he still got drafted in the 5th round by Atlanta, and the Falcons did use him a little bit. And so that's really, what is Olanolua going to do? He's one of those names that people didn't really talk about with this draft class coming into things. When you really talk about the draft class, obviously you're talking about DeAndre Swift of Georgia. You're going to be talking about Jonathan Taylor of Wisconsin. That's a no-brainer. J.K. Dobbins of Ohio State, and the bowling ball, Clyde Edwards-Helaire of LSU. Those are the top four that you really think of. You want to see what these guys are going to be running in the 40. How fast are these guys going to be? J.K. Dobbins, I think he's going to run faster than people expect. I think everyone's looking at that group of four and they're saying, okay, DeAndre Swift, is he quicker than fast? Is this a guy who has that, the burst, laterally, but can he really take the top off of a defense? We know that Jonathan Taylor ran a 10 400 meters. What does that equate to in the 10-yard split? What does that equate to in 40? That's really going to tell you just how with his acceleration, how quickly can he get up to top end speed, and how quickly and can he maintain that through the course of a 40-yard, and is he one of those guys who's going to have that game breaking speed? You see that out of him. So you're just looking to see if that actually translates. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, the little bowling ball, man. He's 5'8", 209, low center of gravity, low pad level. You're expecting him to really show out well in the bench press, showing off some of that strength. And then in the 40, he's another guy. Is he quicker than fast? He does show really good route running skills. So he's another guy that you'll be keeping an eye on. So I think it's going to be interesting with this draft class, at the top with the running backs. But I mentioned Clyde Edwards-Helaire. There's a guy out of Charlotte, Benny LeMay. A lot of people aren't really talking about him. 5'9", 215. So when you're talking about these bowling ball type running backs, both Edwards-Helaire and Benny LeMay, he's really kind of a Edwards-Helaire light in some respects. The two guys remind you a lot of Maurice Jones-Drew, MJD. So you're thinking of CEH with Clyde Edwards-Helaire, MJD, kind of fits a little bit. So you look at Benny LeMay, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, over 20 touchdowns in those two seasons and 40 receptions. Had 54 total in his career. He's one of those running backs that I think people haven't seen enough of him because he played at Charlotte. Even though they did make it to a bowl game, he didn't, really offer up the performance that you were really looking for in the bowl game. But I thought he played well in the East-West Shrine game. Got a lot of playing time, a lot of carries, and you saw the burst. He's one of those guys who's going to be a one cut, get things going, has a little bit of lateral agility to him as well. He's going to be one of those guys I really want to watch, especially in the drills, see how fast he is. And he's somebody that I think is going to send people back to the game film. One guy who I'm really excited to see because I've been hearing all the hype about is A.J. Dillon out of Boston College. There was 6 foot 250, and when you watch the guy play, he looks very much like a one cut and go type of runner, a guy who's going to run you over, and he shows off quite a bit of speed. I mean, 3-time, all 3 seasons. Let's see. Over 1,000 yards for the Eagles this past season, over 1,600 yards, just under 1685, 14 touchdowns. Not much of a pass catcher, only 21 total receptions in his 3 years there at BC. Battled a high ankle sprain as a sophomore, still had over 1,100 yards, and just played in 10 games, and that ankle just really hampered him, and he still managed 1,100 yards. He's one of those guys that I don't think a lot of people are talking about. They look at the size and say he doesn't have a burst. The bigger thing that I worry about for him and what he's going to have to show is the agility, laterally especially. Can he make the jump cuts in the hole? Is he going to be more of a one-trick pony? Basically, patient, hit the hole, foot in the ground and shoot through the hole. One cut and go type of a runner. But is he the guy that everyone's talking about that can run sub 4.5? If he can do that at that size, teams are looking for the next Derrick Henry. I'm telling you, it's going to happen. Teams are going to it's a copycat league. We already saw what Derrick Henry was able to do for the Tennessee Titans, basically help carry the team along with Ryan Tannehill offensively to an AFC title game. Is A.J. Dillon going to be the next Derrick Henry? Well, obviously Derrick Henry was a Heisman Trophy winner, but that's one of the things they're looking for, the next guy that's going to fit that mold. So that's going to be a question mark there. What is he going to run? Eno Benjamin, I think, is going to show out pretty well in terms of pass catching ability. The biggest concern I have for him is the drops and the fumbles. That's really the biggest thing that I think for him. But man, this is a guy who can put his foot in the ground and the spin moves. He worked with LaDainian Tomlinson in Texas, and the spin moves, the spin out of contact, it's really a lot of fun to watch. Darrington Evans, another running back that not a lot of people are really talking about, but they should be. And the reason being is not only is this a guy who had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, over 1,400 yards this past season, had 21 receptions. He's been building in terms of the number of receptions each and every year. Shared some of the time with Jalen Moore while he was with the Mountaineers. But you look at the kick and punt returns. This is a dynamic kickoff return guy. 3 total kickoff returns for touchdown in his career. 5'11", 200 pounds. The junior could have come back for another season. I would have liked to have seen him do that, because I think he might have been able to move himself higher on the draft board. But, the fact is this is a guy who was proven to be a home run threat, a guy that can, take the top off of a defense. He's somebody to keep an eye out for. Salvan Ahmed out of Washington. What's interesting about him is his pass catching ability more than anything else. I think he's one of those guys. He's a speed guy, but Washington would get him out on the perimeter. 50 receptions in his career. Did go over 1,000 yards this past season. 21 touchdowns on the ground. 5'11", 196 pounds. You think of him as kind of the change of pace type of back, and he's bigger than Nyheim Hines, but I think a little bit of Nyheim Hines, a running back who can catch the football out of the backfield. There's going to be a home for those guys, and I think that Salvan Ahmed is going to run well. I think he'll run a pretty quick 40 time, but I worry about him between the tackles. I worry about some of his contact balance. Does he have enough of that strength, the lower body strength to run through that? But absolutely, you can get him out on the edge, especially getting him the football in space and allow him to do his work. He's someone who might surprise. Joshua Kelly out of UCLA. Nobody's really talking about him either as a running back. I think he has a shot at the next level. Another guy who likes to hit the hole, get downhill as quickly as possible, square his shoulders, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons after transferring into UCLA. 24 touchdowns on the ground. Had 27 receptions as a junior. Just 11 this past season, but a guy, he's 5'11", 219, powerfully built, a guy, like I said, foot in the ground, more of a one cut and go type of a guy. Really want to see, if he has any elusiveness to him. And then there are the 2 running backs there at Maryland, the 2 juniors that are both decided to come out, Javon Leake and Anthony McFarland. And what's interesting about these guys, they both they both squat 450 pounds. So you're talking about guys, they're not the biggest guys in the world, but they both, can bench press, can squat out of the gym. Anthony McFarland, 5'9", 208. After a 1,000-yard season, just 614 yards, but he split time with Leak. What's surprising though is you're expecting him to really be a pass catcher out of the backfield. Just 17 receptions this past season, 24 in his 2 years there with the Terps. I want to see if he can catch the football. And he's another one of those guys to where is he sneaky fast, or is he one of those guys who's going to be quicker than he is fast? Another guy that could potentially turn into a Nyheim Hines, but I want to see him catch the football. Javon Leake's another guy. Look, just 10 receptions in his career. Wasn't really much of a factor for Maryland until this past season. 736 yards. But what's interesting is his 17 touchdowns, including 15 in the last 2 seasons. And then you look at him in the kick return game. 3 touchdowns in the last 2 seasons. This past season, 26.8 yard per return, and had 30 kickoff returns. 2 went for touchdown. He's one of those guys. You talk about Memphis, and Darrell Henderson was the guy that everyone was talking about, but Tony Pollard was that sneaky good back, was taken later in the draft and ended up having a better rookie season. Could that be the same thing for McFarland and Leak? That's something to keep an eye on for sure. Now, obviously, I left out Zach Moss, and I shouldn't, because 3-time 1,000-yard rusher, over 1,000 yards in each of the last 3 seasons. This is a guy who I think more than anything else, he's 5'10", 222. If you have that size and you can run, in the low 4.5s or even break 4.5, you're really improving your draft stock. Biggest thing for me with Zach Moss are going to be the medicals. This is a guy who, has battled injuries throughout his career, and if he can show that he can stay healthy, demonstrate that, then you might have something with Zach Moss. He's one of those guys that I think is going to continue to move up draft boards as long as those medicals check out. He shows pretty good hands, 66 receptions in his career, soft hands, especially out on the wheel route, shows an ability to look the ball into his hands, runs really good routes. Zach Moss is one of those guys. I think he shows off some pretty good lateral agility for a running back his size. Another really good receiver, talented receiver is LaMichael Pirine. He's 5'11", 218, about 2,500 yards on the ground, 22 touchdowns. But check this out. He came into this season with just 32 receptions, but was a favorite target of Kyle Trask's. 40 receptions with 5 touchdowns on the year, and he was a guy in the Senior Bowl, who was showing off his ability to catch the football out of the backfield. If you watched him in the bowl game, man, he was a guy who was running the ball between the tackles, out on the perimeter, catching the football and making plays after the catch. LaMichael Pirine is another guy. He's going to be one of those. I want to see what he does there, especially when you can compare him to a lot of other running backs. He's going right after Alonalua. He's going after Alonalua and before Scotty Phillips. Right after, a couple of guys after that is going to be DeAndre Swift. So you'll be able to really kind of get an idea of where LaMichael Pirine is in terms of his burst, in terms of his lateral quickness, his hands. That's going to be something to really keep an eye out for. And then the FCS guy, there's always an FCS guy that's in the mix. And this is a guy who's pretty talented. James Robinson out of Illinois State, 5'10", 225 pounds. Another guy who's just so powerfully built, big physical guy. And, 3 back-to-back 1,000-yard rushing seasons, but over 1,900 yards this past season, 18 touchdowns, and then 16 receptions as well. This is a guy who's not going to be a burner. I'd be surprised if he might run just under 4.6, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's right in that 4.6 range. But a guy who does show a pretty good burst. I think he's a little bit quicker to the hole. But he's not going to run away from you, but just the power, the contact balance, he runs with a low center of gravity, bounces off contact, gets to the second level in a hurry. So he's a guy to also keep an eye out for when you're talking about running backs. Keyshawn Vaughn, I think he's going to be a burner. The former Illinois Fighting Illini, moved on to Vanderbilt for his last 2 seasons, back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons. He's going to be someone who I think is going to really set the track on fire. 5'10", 210. Really want to see what he can do in the 40. Michael Warren, I think, is going to put up a ton of reps in the bench press. This is a dude who is so powerful at 5'10", 222 pounds. They call him the truck for a reason. He runs people over. Back-to-back seasons with over 1,200 yards and 33 touchdowns in those games, also with 46 receptions. So a guy who has some pretty soft hands, but he can also be very physical between the tackles. He's going to be a guy to keep an eye out for sure. J.J. Taylor, 5'6", 185 pounds, the junior, battled some injuries, during his career. At points, really the breakout season was his sophomore campaign, redshirt sophomore last season, over 1,400 yards on the ground. He has 62 receptions. So what teams are going to be looking at is, can he translate to the next level? He's only 5'6", but you look at some of those smaller backs like Tariq Cohen. Can he translate? Can he be one of those weapons, especially as a pass catcher? He's so small. Another guy that I look at who's on the smaller end is Scotty Phillips. 5'8", 211. What does he look like compared to Edwards-Helaire, Benny LeMay? When I think of Scotty Phillips, I don't think of that bruising running back. He only played in 9 games in 2019, 18 receptions. He's going to be someone who, can he catch the football out of the backfield? He may end up having to, try to showcase that he's one of those change of pace guys. So it's going to be interesting. I think, Tony Jones Jr. out of Notre Dame, not going to be the fastest guy. He's one of those bruisers, 5'11", 224 pounds. He'll be a bruiser. I think JaMycal Hasty is going to have to show out really well. He's a good pass catcher. 3 straight seasons with at least 25 receptions, 5'9", 205. Can he be one of those change of pace backs catching the football out of the backfield? Rico Dowdle has battled injuries his entire career there at South Carolina, 6'2", 215. So he'll be one of those guys to keep an eye out for. The guy that we're not really talking about much is DJ Dallas. He's a physical running back there from Miami, 5'10", 214. He's really going to have to stand out. I think in this running back class, he could get lost in the shuffle, and he's going to have to show that he can run with power, and that he can, that he has that speed. Does he have any that lateral agility? Is he another one cut and go type of guys? I think there are other running backs in this class who can do a lot of the same things that DJ Dallas can do, but they're more athletic, they're more explosive. So I think that's going to be interesting. Raymond Calais, out of Louisiana, he's coming from a group of 5, and he shared the backfield with 2 other guys, Trey Regis and Elijah Mitchell. What's he going to look like? Can he separate himself? And the guy that basically was a touchdown maker for Western Michigan, 5'9", 190-pound Levante Bellamy, over 1,400 yards this past season, 23 touchdowns, have 45 receptions in each of the last 2 seasons. During his sophomore campaign, he played just 9 games in 2016 and 2017 combined. So obviously some medicals are going to have to check out for him as well. So the running back position is really going to be interesting. Like I said, to close this out, we had 25 guys drafted this past season in 2019, and only 5 were not at the combine. So it bodes well for our group that we have. But when we're comparing some of these guys, it's going to be interesting to see who really stands out and who are the guys that really are going to have to make things up, especially during their workouts. So that takes us to the offensive line. And what's interesting with how the offensive line goes is, I have it kind of breaking down tackle, guard, and center, but they really don't have that set up at the combine. And really what's interesting when you watch these guys is they always time the 40. And with an offensive lineman, they're not going to run 40 yards. So, if you're running a 40 and you run really fast, that just shows off some of your athleticism. But really the bigger thing that really translates to the football field is that 10-yard split. That's really what you want to see. You want to see the arm length. That's going to be very important for some of these tackles. If they don't have the longer arms, if they're not, at 34 inches, then, you start worrying about that a little bit. But some of the shorter arm tackles are still able to get it done at the next level. So, they've been able to prove that as the game's changing a little bit. You don't necessarily need to have those long arms, but that's something to keep an eye out for. Bench press, obviously kind of self-explanatory. You have to be able to handle some of these guys, and when you're looking at some of the other drills, vertical jump, broad jump, 3-cone drill, you're just looking for guys who are athletes. Do they have that lower body explosion when they fire out of their stance? Are they going to be able to really, provide that burst and really be able to drive guys off the football? You're going to be looking at body types. You really are. You're going to be looking at guys who are the athletic guys. Do they have, a whole lot there into their midsection or not? Who are the guys who really have those big bubble butts? The guards, especially those guys that are going to, really be the road graders, the guys who can anchor, get down low and really be able to battle with those defensive tackles. So it's really going to be, an interesting, when you watch the offensive linemen, but the drills are absolutely important. You want to see who can move, especially on some of the kick slides, the mirror drills, who's going to be able to stay down in their stance, who looks very comfortable and who doesn't. I can remember when we watched Taylor Lewan, Jake Matthews, that draft class, and the way that all those guys moved. They moved so well. They looked so comfortable. It was really just kind of a pick your poison as to which offensive tackle you wanted. Because they moved really, really well. Lewan was the guy who had more power to him. He actually fell in the draft a little bit. You had Jake Matthews out there who, really looked like a tremendous athlete. And he was so comfortable, especially in that mirror drill, because you've got the rabbit that's just kind of running all over the place. And I thought that he was one of those guys who just looked so under control and so poised throughout the entire drill. And it was just so much fun watching him Obviously, you had Greg Robinson there from Auburn, who was the tackle that went number 2 overall to the Rams. But the guys I was really concerned with and really wanted to watch were Jake Matthews and Taylor Lewan, because I thought those were the two really the class of the offensive tackle group. And they ultimately proved right, because you see what they're able to do at the next level. I'm talking about the 2014 offensive tackle group. I mean, if you look over, 2015, that was a group where Andrus Peat, Cedric Abwehi, drafted in round number 1. 2016, it was Stanley, Conklin, Tunsil, easy movers in a lot of those drills. Bowles, Garrett Bowles, Ryan Ramczyk, Bowles and Ramczyk both showed off some athleticism in 2017. 2018, you had Mike McGlinchey, Colton Miller out of UCLA. Showed off some surprising agility for a guy his size, and I think that's ultimately what helped him get drafted in round number 1. And then this past season, Jonah Williams moving really well. Doesn't really matter that his arms aren't all that long. He can play tackle and guard. That versatility got him drafted number 11 overall. Sucks that he got hurt. Hopefully he's getting back to the Bengals soon. Andre Dillard, tremendous athleticism. And I think, Titus Howard, you saw the game film there at Alabama State, very powerful guy, long arms, but he was such an easy mover there at the combine. And that's really what you're looking for out of your offensive tackle position, especially when you're talking about first round tackles. So obviously when we're talking about first round tackles in this year's draft class, you want to see what Jedrick Wills is going to look like. Jedrick Wills is 6'5", 320 pounds. Looks to be the best pass protector in this draft. Every single one of his pass sets seems to just look, perfection. A guy, takes perfect angles, the hands, he's very patient with the hands. The strike is very powerful, able to mirror guys out there on the outside. The power step back to the inside, really walling off the secondary moves. But then you have the power out of Tristan Wirf, 6'5", 322, out of Iowa. This is a guy who broke Brandon Sheriff's records with the hang clean, 450, did 3 reps. He's going to be a guy that you would expect to really set the world on fire with the bench press. Going to be fun to watch him there. The big dancing bear. Mekhi Becton, 6'7", 369. We all remember when Orlando Brown didn't really move all that well at the combine, still was a second round pick and is a starter there for the Baltimore Ravens. He was such a big offensive lineman there, but you can go back and point to a lot of guys that are that size. Phil Lodehold is a guy from Oklahoma that he comes to mind. You really want to see what type of athlete he is. And I think if he shows off and really, if this guy runs anywhere in the low 5s, then you have to be considering taking him in the top 10, because you watch him out on the field and he gets out in front of his running backs and is a good lead blocker, and surprising agility in the in pass protection, good wide sets with his kick slides, able to beat defenders to the edge. He's a massive guy as it is. And then in the running game, he just buries guys. He's got these really long arms, not really sure how that's going to translate with the bench press, but he just takes guys and clears them out. Just throwing them out of the bar. He's a big physical dude. So really want to see what's going to happen there. If we look back to last year's offensive line group, what you're talking about is 57 total offensive linemen invited to the draft. Invited to the combine. We've got 52 this year. And we had a total of 40 offensive linemen. And if I did my calculations right, you've got 23 offensive tackles, 12 guards, and 5 centers. So of those 40, only 5 weren't invited to the combine. So that was Justin School out of Vanderbilt, got some playing time, but the 49ers was a 6th round pick. Drew Forbes of Southeast Missouri State going to Cleveland in round 6. George Asafo, Edgy for Kentucky, taken in round number 7 by the Giants. And then you look at a couple of the guards. Wes Martin, a guy that I really liked out of Indiana, going to Washington in round number 4. And Nick Allegretti out of Illinois, going off the board in round number 7. He's a guard slash center, but I have him penciled in with the guards. So those were the 5 guys that weren't taken. And I think if you look at the group of guys that weren't selected that went to the combine, and my laptop is running a little slow as I'm pulling this up. We had, if I did my math right in my head, that'd be 22 guys that weren't selected. You're looking at, some of these guys that didn't necessarily, there were some question marks. You've got a guy like Paul Adams out of Missouri, 6'6", 318, arms weren't all that long, wasn't the most explosive athlete in any of the drills. Bo Benshaw, ran a 5'2", 440, 6'6", 309. He was somebody who just bench pressed 20 reps in the bench press. He was someone that really struggled with a lot of speed, and it made sense. Let's see what else we have here. On the flip side, you look at a guy like Nate Davis out of Charlotte. He was the guy who, when he got into a stance, the butt was so low. 6'3", 316, ran a 5'2", 340, 23 reps in the bench press. So another guy who wasn't the most explosive athlete, but a guy, when you put on the game film, he really popped. And that was one of the things, I think, when you look at some of these, Shaq Calhoun out of Mississippi State, Donnell Green out of Minnesota, Nate Herbig out of Stanford was inconsistent with his game tape. Mitch Hyatt, I thought, was very inconsistent there with Clemson. Martez Ivey, what position was he going to play? Really long arms, but that was a question there. Let's see. Tyler Jones, I was kind of surprised he didn't get drafted out of NC State, but really he was kind of that tweener, 6'3", 306, 33 3/4 inch arms. What position is he going to play? Those are some of the guys that you looked at. Joshua Nijman. Is he, he was a project, 6'7", 324. I thought that he was a pretty good athlete. I thought someone was going to take a chance on him. He ultimately didn't get drafted, ended up going to the Packers. I think he might still be on their practice squad. But you looked at him, there were a lot of different question marks. Tyler Romer had the off-field issues. Ryan Pope, big 6'7" guy, but didn't move all that well. William Sweet didn't have a lot of playing time. Trevin Tate played tackle for Memphis. He was just 6'2", 293, kind of an undersized guy. Nothing really special about him. So those were the guys that when you looked at the combine and you're watching them and you're watching some of these guys, you have some of those question marks out there on the field and they don't really stand out at the combine. Then you really start worrying, all right, is this guy really going to make his mark in the draft or not? And is he going to have to earn his way on as a preferred preferred free agent, undrafted guy that they bring in after the draft is over? So some of the other names to keep an eye out for, obviously some of the bigger names you're going to have, I think Andrew Thomas out of Georgia. We were talking about the top offensive tackles. I missed on him. 6'5", 320 pounds. He's one of those guys, you look at him, he's very powerful in the run game. They question about, the question really about him is, the pass protection. I think one of the things that he does a lot of times is he bends a little bit, gets out over his toes, and that really worries me about his balance. You really want to see him in the drills. Is he somebody who's going to get out over his toes, or is he going to be someone who can stay more upright and be able to mirror guys and really on the kick slide and things like that? That's something that I'm really going to be looking for out of Andrew Thomas. Is he going to solidify himself as a top 10 guy, or is he someone that might end up slipping a little bit, having Becton and Tristan Wirfs moving ahead of him? The other guy to really keep an eye out for is going to be Josh Jones out of Louisville, 6'7", 310, a big tackle. This guy moves so well. I mean, you watch him as a pass protector. He's so light on his feet, easily changing directions. The guys will make a spin move back to the inside. They'll get into his body a little bit, but he moves his feet so well. It doesn't look like he ever really panics. You don't see him really holding guys because he doesn't panic. The same can't be said for Colton McKivitz, the 6'5", 321 pound tackle out of West Virginia. He really struggled in a lot of the game, the one-on-ones there at the Senior Bowl. Just really couldn't handle the speed. he's someone who may have to kick inside, and he's going to have to. Hopefully, they'll allow him to play. Really show off things there at the guard position in some of his workouts. He'll get to play both tackle and guard a little bit. I think at the combine, so we'll really want to see where he's more comfortable. Austin Jackson out of USC, 6'6", 310, the junior. This is a kid who I thought had a pretty darn good season there for USC, but in some of the big games going up against some of the bigger pass rushers, he really struggled. I think he's still raw. His hands are inconsistent, especially with some of it, the striking. He really got beat. I thought he did a good job against AJ Epinesa for the most part, moved his feet pretty well when he was able to cut off the edge, not allow AJ Epinesa to beat him with some of that technique and some of that power. He was able to stifle a lot of those runs. But the problem was AJ Epinesa, if he was getting to the edge, if he was able to attack that outside shoulder and really get that edge on him, he's going to make that soft edge by really overpowering him at the point, attacking his hands. And so I think some of that technique with Austin Jackson. Also, I think he's really athletic, getting out and being the lead blocker in the running game. I wanted to see more power out of him. So be interesting to see what he does there at the combine. Isaiah Wilson, the big 6'7", 340-pound junior right tackle for Georgia. Georgia losing both of their tackles, both decided to come out early. But Isaiah Wilson's a big dude, and you really want to see, how much of an easy mover is he? Does he have a chance to sneak into round number one? I think he and Austin Jackson are two of those guys that people are kind of flirting with, potentially being late first rounders. I think they're going to be day two guys, but what's he going to do at the combine? Can he demonstrate some of that athleticism that you really want to see from a guy that big? I think one of the guys who's really going to be a workout warrior is going to be Matt Pert out of UConn, 6'7", 302. I watched UConn play Houston, and I thought at times Matt Pert did a better job overall than Josh Jones, surprisingly enough. I think he's still raw. I think he's one of those guys who, hands were inconsistent, footwork was inconsistent at times, but this is someone who he looks like a basketball player out there. Frankly, he gets really low out of his stance and he stays there. And so it's like, you're watching a defender play defense, and that's really what he looks like. That pad level does not creep up. And I really want to see if he's going to showcase that at the combine in a lot of those mirror drills and things like that. Looking at this group, man, there are a lot of big dudes. Alex Taylor, 6'9", 294 out of South Carolina State. I thought he proved at the Senior Bowl that he belongs, but at the same time, the part that you worry about for him is he is 6'9", and he has such skinny legs. He's gonna have to get into the weight room and really fill out a little bit on the lower body. I think right now he's a little top heavy, which doesn't always bode well for someone who, as especially being when you're a tackle dealing with some of those speed rushers, with that speed to power there on the outside. Prince Tega Winogo out of Auburn, 6'7", 304, another guy who's really raw. But a guy who is very athletic. The hands don't always match up with the feet. That's what gets him into trouble at times, but really a tremendous athlete. Going to be fun to see what he can do there. Justin Herron out of Wake Forest, 6'5", 291. He's just a guy who just got the job done. And that's one of those things. I remember, looking at Justin's school, I look at Justin Herron. I think he'll be a 5th or 6th rounder. And he'll make a roster. He'll probably be a swing tackle, probably play a little bit of guard as well. Not really a name that people are going to talk about when they watch this draft class, but a guy who I think is going to really surprise some people. We were talking back to the bigger guys. Yasir Duran out of Missouri, the best offensive tackle and really best offensive lineman there for the Mizzou Tigers. 6'7", 330 pounds, moves pretty well. Curious to see what he looks like. You're also going to see Tristan Colon Castillo, the center there for Missouri, 6'4", 315, one of the more athletic centers in this draft class. Looking at this as well, you want to talk about Trey Adams out of Washington. This is the guy who's battled a knee injury and then a back injury. And he just doesn't look himself. He looks a step slow. He looks flat-footed at times, and some of his sets, he wasn't beating guys to the edge because a lot of his kick slides were basically, there wasn't much depth to them. They were almost horizontal instead of taking the proper angles to beat the guys to the edge. And that's one of those things. If a guy got a good jump, he's getting by Adams because he looks like he's lost a step. So that's one of the things I think medicals are going to have to check out. And then he's also going to have to show that he can be that athlete. He's going to be the first guy in line. So when you're watching all this stuff, he's going to be the first guy. And so, what's he going to do to really show up? That's going to be a huge question mark, in my opinion. Some of the small school guys, I'm really looking forward to seeing play. Really work out, I guess you could say. Ben Barch out of St. John's in Minnesota, 6'6", 308. Is he a tackle? Is he a guard? I really want to see some of the measurables. He could very well end up being a tackle at the next level. And, everyone talks about Ali Marpet. I think you get a guy from a small school like that and you start making some of those comparisons. Really want to see, like I said, the measurables, just how well he moves, but he absolutely shows some promise, what he did there, especially in the Senior Bowl practices. And then Kyle Murphy out of Rhode Island, he's 6'4", 300. If you put on the game film there at Rhode Island, this is a guy who just had pancake after pancake after pancake. Obviously you're talking about the FCS level, but with some of these defensive ends, he was in a different class, and he would lock onto his man. He'd drive him a good 5, 8, 10 yards down the field, just continuing to drive him down, and then he would just bury the guy. So you really want to see how he shows up. Does he look like he belongs with the rest of this group? If you watch the game film, if that's any evidence, then that's really something that is going to stand out, I think. Danny Pinter of Ball State, 6'4", 300, that, the tackle there. Cameron Clark out of Charlotte, 6'5", 293. I mentioned Nate Davis. Nate Davis was a guy who ultimately got drafted and started for Tennessee in the AFC Championship game. Those are two guys who have a chance to show that they belong. Show that they have the athleticism to be able to match up. Switching gears a little bit, Ezra Cleveland, guys that, you're talking about guys that have something to prove. Ezra Cleveland, 6'6", 310. He's going to show up really well in a lot of the lateral agility. He's very light on his feet, a finesse guy. I want to see some power. I want to see when he hits the bags, are you going to really get that power and that punch? I just clap my hands. I realize that's really loud, but I really want to hear that. I really want to see that from him. And what's he going to bench press? He's got some pretty long arms, but the thing that I worry for him is that he's just so finesse and there's no power. I really worry about that for him. And that's one of the things that I'm going to really be keeping an eye on. Day one of the combine, you've got Lucas Niang, 6'7", 328 out of TCU. One of the better tackles, ended up going down to a leg injury, out for the season. What do the medicals check out for him there? Those are the guys, from the tackles, really keeping an eye on it, really wanting to see what's going on. Sadiq Charles for LSU, 6'4", 295. He's going to have to show that he's a pretty good athlete. There are a lot of other tackles out here. I'm really curious to see, is Jack Driscoll, what type of athlete is he, there out of Auburn? I thought he looked at times like the more consistent and the more polished technician there at tackle than Winogo. So he's somebody to keep an eye out for at the tackle position. Now, when we talk about guards and we transition there, when we talk about the guards, we don't have a guard in this year's draft that's going to compare favorably to Chris Lindstrom, who ended up going in the first round. I don't think we have a first round guard, but we do have 3 guards that were taken in on day 2 in the third round, and that's Michael Dieter, Nate Davis, and then Connor McGovern, who had the versatility to play in both tackle and guard. I'm sorry, it was guard and center. But in any event, when we look at this draft class, we're looking at some of these guards, you are going to ask yourself, are there guys that are going to be able to come in right away and be able to make some plays out there? Obviously there's Robert Hunt out of Louisiana. He's 6'5", 327, played tackle there for the Raging Cajuns, but he's going to be inside at guard, some physicality there. You really want to see what he looks like there. Is he, what type of athlete is he going to be? Ben Bredesen and Shane Lemieux Guys that are veterans. Both guys played over 50 games for Michigan and Oregon respectively. They're 6'4", 6'5", over 320 pounds. You want to see what type of movers they are, what type of power they have to their game. But two guys who I thought held up pretty well over the course of the season. Ben Bredesen, I thought he anchors really well, shows some good hands. I thought, the flip side, though, is Shane Lemieux really struggled at times with some of the speed rushers. Then you have John Simpson out of Clemson. 6'4", 330. This dude is nasty. He's one of those maulers. He's going to want to beat you up and bury you. And so I'm expecting to see some power out of him, obviously, in some of those drills when he comes around and he's pulling. You really want to see him, explode into those bags and drive the guys back. And I'm curious to see what he's going to bench press as well. That's going to be fun. Logan Stenberg out of Kentucky, another nasty guard, 6'6", 332 pounds. He'll be one of those guys to keep an eye out for. Let's see. And then Jonah Jackson out of Ohio State, transferred in 6'4", 305. I think he's going to be one of the better athletes there at the guard position. Want to see, he may be a guy who I think could run sub 5 potentially, probably more so, probably going to be sub 515, when it's all said and done. I think he's a pretty good athlete. The two big dudes there at the guard position, Damian Lewis out of LSU, 6'3", 332, and then Solomon Kinley, 6'4", 335. Not going to expect them to, blaze a trail there in the 40, but man, Damian Lewis punishing, especially in the college football playoff. He's the guy at right guard. I think I could plug him in and have him play right away. He's somebody that I'm really looking forward to seeing, especially with some of that power. And then Solomon Kinley, he's a guy who's going to struggle with speed, really struggled at times as a pass protector, but man, he and Andrew Thomas playing on that left side for the Bulldogs created a ton of space, and really just generated a lot of movement. One guy that nobody's talking about at a Boise State is John Molchon. He's 6'5", 318, another guy who plays with power, bit of a mean streak as well. He was the power to Ezra Cleveland's finesse, and I think he's a guy who's going to have a shot late day 3. Keep an eye out for him. Michael Onwenu was moving guys around in the All-Star games, 6'3", 375. He's the big physical dude. And then you got John Runyon, 6'5", 321, was playing tackle, really playing out of position there at Michigan. Struggled some at times with speed coming off the edge. I think you move him inside to guard, and I think you've got something there. I think, like, you look at Michael Dieter and what he's been able to do, at Wisconsin and then moving on to the Dolphins. I wouldn't be surprised if John Runyon sneaks his way into the 3rd round. I think, they may have something there with him. So let's see. The final guy at the guard position is Netane Muti out of Fresno State, 6'3", 307. He's a junior, has decided to come out, and a guy when he's healthy, Pro Football Focus has him rated as a top guard in terms of run blocking and pass blocking. Really a big, physical, nasty type of guy, nasty disposition. Problem is he can't stay healthy. And he was injured, in all 3 years there with the Bulldogs in the Valley there at Fresno State. And that's the part that worries me. I think the medicals are really going to be huge for him. Can he be a day 2 pick? The biggest question mark is going to be those medicals. How are those going to show up? And then finally, one final guy to talk about there at the guard position, I just looking at it, was Akeem Adeniji out of Kansas. He's 6'5", 300. He was a left tackle, but they played him at guard in the All-Star games, and I actually really like that. He's a big physical guy. I think he lost at times with some of the technique at the tackle position, and but I think he's big, he's physical. I think ultimately his home is going to be there at guard. If you're talking centers, at center position, I think Lloyd Cushenberry is going to be the guy to really look for. 6'4", 316, junior out of LSU, long arms. This was the guy who I thought anchored really well. He was someone who you're going up against a lot of the guys there on the interior there for Clemson. I thought he handled himself very well. I thought that he handled himself really well against Neville Gallimore there when LSU played OU. And you get to the Senior Bowl, he was the one guy that was able to slow down Javon Kinlaw. So doing that, was really impressive. I think one of the better movers and a guy who could potentially run sub 5, in my opinion, is going to be Matt Hennessy out of Temple, 6'4", 295, the junior. People aren't talking about him. He's, a guy, I think, as a sophomore only gave up 2 total pressures out of all of his pass block attempts. I think that's what Pro Football Focus had for him. Very athletic. He's not the most powerful guy, but just he's one of those guys, if you want someone to get a reach block, a guy who's going to be very, in the running game, a guy as a pass protector who is going to move really well, he could potentially be your guy. Nick Harris out of Washington, he's a shorter guy, 6'1", 302, but he uses that leverage to his advantage, gets under the defensive tackle's pad level, able to anchor really well, pretty athletic, climbing to the next level. When we're talking centers, you have to mention Cesar Ruiz out of Michigan, 6'4", 320. A lot of people think this junior is the top center in the draft class because of his physicality and athleticism. I want to see how these guys kind of separate themselves. The guy that I think everyone's been talking about as the top center is the Remington Award winner, Tyler Biadasz out of Wisconsin, 6'3", 321. Started every game in his career at Wisconsin. May not be the best athlete in this group, but you still have to look at the fact that he played with 3 guys who got, that moved on to the NFL, and they blocked for Jonathan Taylor and still got him over 2,000 yards. Cole Van Landen, his left tackle, was just a part-time starter over there, and they were still able to put that together. That's the big question mark, that I have around Tyler Biadasz is why people aren't giving him that credit. He isn't, he's not the best athlete, but I think he's one of those guys who understands angles. I think he understands when he's lining up over somebody what he needs to do to get the job done. He's a guy who plays pretty well out on the move, out on the perimeter, pulls pretty well. He's not the best athlete, but I think that high football IQ isn't going to rule him out. I don't have him as my number 1 center anymore. I'm moving Lloyd Cushenberry up. I think Matt Hennessy is kind of moving up because of the athleticism, but you can't rule out Tyler Biadasz with that football acumen. And I think the interviews are really what's going to be important for Tyler Biadasz, and that's really, you're going to watch the workouts. There are probably going to be some guys that are going to work out a little bit better than him, but those interviews, I think that's really what's going to be key for him. Which takes us to the quarterbacks. And the quarterback position, what's interesting when you talk quarterbacks, a season ago, we had 17 quarterbacks invited to the combine. We had 11 drafted. All 11 quarterbacks that were drafted went to the combine. So, if you're a quarterback who didn't get invited to the combine, you're already kind of at a disadvantage. When you're talking about the quarterbacks who didn't get drafted, you're talking about Jake Browning, limited arm strength, Nick Fitzgerald, more of an athlete, Tyree Jackson, the big 6'7". We haven't seen a 6'7" quarterback really translate to the next level. Brett Rippon, another guy from an athleticism standpoint, questionable there. Kyle Shermer, out of Vanderbilt, and Jordan Ta'amu, a guy who I think, tremendous athlete. He's there with the XFL looking to get a second chance, but he was just somebody who I think the accuracy at times, just wasn't all that consistent. So you're talking about the quarterback position for this year's draft and what that looks like. Well, quarterbacks, we have 17 quarterbacks in this year's draft class. And obviously you're going to have Joe Burrow. Is he going to throw? Kyler Murray didn't work out at all, and you still see where he ended up going. So I'm not at all concerned if Joe Burrow decides he's not going to work out. You'd love to see the competitive fire in him be able to perform, with a lot of these other guys, but I don't anticipate that happening. Obviously with Tua Tagovailoa, the injuries and the medicals and what that's going to look like. The hip, they just reported that his hip, I don't know, I believe it was Adam Schefter. They were talking about how the hip has healed as well as possible that they could have ever asked for. So he hasn't started the football movements yet and the football workouts yet, but he's somebody who, with those medicals, if they can validate that, especially Miami there sitting at number 5, he can end up being that pick in the top 5. You look at Jordan Love. I think the athleticism there, 6'4", 225 out of Utah State. You want to get him into the interviews and really talk to him. You have him really break down game film, really look at this season. A lot of the decision making that he was making, he was forcing a lot of throws. He was really trying to make things happen with an inexperienced receiving core. That's really one of the things that I think is going to be critical for Jordan Love are those interviews. I think he's going to really test well. I think his athleticism is going to be there for sure. Justin Herbert looked great at the Senior Bowl, was a Senior Bowl MVP. Really want to see at the Combine, are you going to see more of the same? Are you going to see him consistently making those throws down the field all over the place? What type of athleticism are we going to see? The interviews, I think, are going to be important there for him. Teams really getting to see his personality because a lot of people, they talk about him being an introvert, and can he be a leader at the next level? Same concerns were there for Marcus Mariota, and he still went number 2 overall to the Titans. So we'll see what that looks like. Jake Fromm out of Georgia, 6'2", 220. He made some NFL-type throws, but he was inconsistent with those, I think, at times. He's going to have to prove that he has that NFL-type arm to be able to make all those throws. Jacob Eason out of Washington, 6'6", 227 pounds. Would have loved to see him come back. This is a guy who, there's no question, he has the arm strength. He'll be able to sit there and throw the ball all over the field, make all types of throws. The question is going to be the accuracy. This guy throws the ball so hard, short, intermediate, deep balls. He throws the ball so hard at times. There's just no touch. A lot of balls won't have much of an arc to it. Won't really allow the receivers to run under it. He's going to try to just put the ball on a line. He's going to sail that bat. Those passes. He's going to have to show that he's worked on that. If he wants to improve his draft stock at all. I think right now he's sitting there at number 6 behind Jake Fromm. My top 4: Burrow, Tagovailoa, Herbert, and then Love. Those are my top 4 right now. After those top 6, though, man, anything is up for grabs. And the guy that I really want you to look out for is Cole McDonald out of Hawaii, 6'4", 220 pounds. This is a kid who, coming into the season, everybody was talking about him. It was one of those things, man, 36 touchdowns, 10 interceptions, over 3,800 yards. This season, he got off to a rocky start, 4 interceptions to start things out against Arizona. Ended up with just 14 on the season. Most of his interceptions were at the beginning of the year. Threw for over 4,000 yards, just under 64% completion percentage. A guy who can throw the football down the field, has a lot of those skills that you're looking for in this day and age in the NFL. His skill set definitely translates. Another guy who I think is going to surprise some people is going to be, Anthony Gordon. He didn't set the world on fire there at the Senior Bowl, but I think he's one of those guys who, running a Mike Leach offense. Look at what Gardner Minshew was able to do. Not the best arm, not the best, but he saw the field, he wasn't the best athlete, I guess I could say, to finish that thought, but he could see the field really well, knows where to go with the football, tremendously accurate. You're going to get the same out of Anthony Gordon, has a tremendous release. That's one of the things you're really going to see. Really, really quick release. It's almost Jimmy G-like. Those guys, I'm talking about them because some of the other seniors really opened the door for them. Steven Montez and Shea Patterson struggled mightily at the Senior Bowl. They don't really look draftable at this point, so they're really going to have to redeem themselves. On the flip side, James Morgan out of Florida International, 6'4", 213, showed out really well in the East-West Shrine game. This is a guy who is a career 57.2% completion percentage. But his first season there at Florida International, over 65% through the air. A guy with 65 touchdowns, 34 interceptions. Bit of a project, but he's one of those guys like Alex Magoo a couple of years ago coming out of FIU, got himself drafted. I think James Morgan will be a late pick, probably late 6th or 7th round pick is probably where he'll go. But I think he gets drafted. Nate Stanley out of Iowa has another chance, another guy who's going to have a chance to be a top 10 quarterback in this draft. 6'4", 243, just 58% completion percentage, which definitely worries you. But a lot of that is some of the deep ball accuracy. Not always able to hit the guys there, but if you watch him with the short to intermediate throws, he's absolutely tremendously accurate there. If you watched him in the skills challenge that they had on ESPN, showed off, the accuracy on the short to intermediates. If you tuned in and watched USC take on Iowa in the Holiday Bowl, Stanley really lit up the Trojans, throwing the ball all over the place to Amir Smith-Marset and just allowing him to run under the ball and make plays. And I think he's going to have to show that deep ball accuracy. Can he throw that ball consistently? If he can make some of those adjustments, he'll be a name that we'll be talking about potentially in that group with Cole McDonald and Anthony Gordon as that next crop of quarterbacks. Jake Luton, he's 6'7", out of Oregon State. Pretty good accuracy, over 62% in his career. But a guy his size, he's going to have to show off some good athleticism and an ability to really move, because that doesn't really translate. And when you're looking at guys like Dan McGuire and Brock Osweiler and what they did at the NFL level, things don't really bode well for him. So he's really going to have to stand out. And then finally, the polarizing Jalen Hurts. Look, I don't know if he's going to run a 40. Because there are going to be those comparisons. Is he going to be someone who's going to be a running back or a receiver or something like that? We didn't see Lamar Jackson run because he wanted to just be a quarterback. We didn't see Kyler Murray run. Some of these athletes there at the quarterback position, they don't want to be talked about as anything other than a quarterback. So you look at Jalen Hurts, 6'2", 218 pounds. We know he's a workout warrior himself. He'll probably bench press 225, probably 25 times, guy who can squat over 500 pounds. He's just, he was an amateur power lifter in high school. The question is going to be, his arm strength and, his ability to be accurate with the football, and a lot of those decision-making and the processing and such. He'll get himself drafted, and he'll probably get himself drafted a little bit higher because of some of that athleticism. But, he's just one of those guys. I wouldn't put him in that class just because he struggled quite a bit, really seeing the entire defense, taking what the defense gives him. If the first read wasn't there, he was pulling the ball and running it. And you just can't have that at the quarterback position. So he's really going to have to, in the interviews, get up on the board and really show teams, he knows what he's talking about and that he can see the whole field. So we're skipping the receivers, saving them for last because we got 55 receivers to get through. So I kind of want to knock out the tight ends real quick. And, we look at the tight ends, there are 20 tight ends in this year's draft class. The prior draft class, we had 21 invited to the combine. 16 were drafted, and all 16 that were drafted were at the combine. And so the 5 that weren't drafted out of the tight end position, Kendall Blanton, more of a blocker there at Mizzou, ran in 4.95, disappointing there. Keenan Brown out of Texas State had good hands. He's just 6'2", ran a 4.75. CJ Conrad out of Kentucky, I thought he was a lot bigger, but he showed up at 6'4", 249. Daniel Helm out of Duke, just an average athlete. Dax Raymond, I was actually surprised, he didn't get drafted. Big hands, ran a 4.73, but, on the bench press, just bench, 15 times at 225. You want to have your tight ends with some power. He didn't bring any of that to the table. Showed off some average athleticism. He was the other one that wasn't drafted. And this is a draft class, obviously, that you had TJ Hawkinson and Noah Fant at the top of the group, but then, Dawson Knox. Foster Moreau was the guy that was a surprise. Drew Sample got drafted a lot higher than people were expecting out of Washington. He went to Cincinnati in round number 2. Irv Smith showed up well for Minnesota. Really a nice draft class at the tight end position. This year we don't have, we had two go off the board in round number one. We don't have that this year. When you look at this tight end crop, we don't have guys that are going to be standing out as a first round pick. And really the question is going to be, who's going to be that first guy that's going to come off the board in round number two? And my thing when I look at it is, Hayden Hurst. If you're talking about Baltimore, Hayden Hurst was the more complete tight end, but Mark Andrews was an explosive receiver on the outside for Baker Mayfield at OU. And that really translated into a Pro Bowl performance there for Mark Andrews at the tight end position. So when you're looking at some of these guys who are going to be pass catchers, who are going to be the guys that can be explosive down the field, and then, obviously if they can also block, that's really going to set them apart. When you're talking about the Travis Kelce's and guys like that, or Jason Witten, what he's done in his career. George Kittle's another guy. You really want to be able to see if they can also block, but are they the tremendous athletes first and foremost? And look, you're looking for who's really going to stand out. George Kittle, man, this guy ran a 4.6 40, 37-inch vertical leap, was a tremendous athlete, catching everything that was thrown his way in the combine, and showed off some power as a blocker. Who's going to be that guy this year? Is there going to be somebody that's going to surprise and really put up some big numbers? I don't know if there's really an athlete that's going to show up that way, but we weren't talking about George Kittle as an athlete like that until he really showed up at the combine. Adam Troutman out of Dayton, he's one of those guys that I think is going to be interesting. Adam is probably the best overall receiver in this draft class. He's 6'6", 253, 70 catches, 916 yards, 14 touchdowns, had 31 in his career for the Flyers. Excellent hands, runs well after the catch. You look at him and he has the look of a starting NFL tight end, because he can do everything. You can line him up in the slot. You can, split him out wide, mismatch nightmare. I think of, Travis Kelce in the playoffs, at times was unguardable, by linebackers and defensive backs. The other guy who I think could potentially be a tremendous athlete out there is Harrison Bryant out of Florida Atlantic, the Mackey Award winner, 6'5", 240, over 1,000 yards there for the Owls and Lane Kiffin. He's just a guy, he's so smooth. When you watch him run his routes, I want to see what he's going to run in the 40. I think he's going to be pretty explosive. I think he's a better athlete than people are giving him credit for. On the flip side, everyone's talking about Cole Kmet. And Cole Kmet, I think, he's a good tight end, but he hasn't completed an entire season. The most games that he's actually played in a season, in his 3 years there at Notre Dame, was his junior season. He only played in 10 games. And, he was battling injuries throughout that. So 6'5", 250, looks a little stiff in his route running, but he's, he's one of the better blockers in this draft. I see him being kind of a mid-round pick at this point. The flip side, you got Bryson Hopkins out of Purdue, 6'5", 245, another really good athlete, 61 catches, 830 yards and 7 touchdowns. A guy who can get down the field. He's explosive up the seam and a pretty decent blocker as well. He's going to be high, one of the higher drafted tight ends, I believe. Hunter Bryant is a guy that a lot of people like, 6'2", 239 out of Washington, 52 catches, 825 yards. He was the go-to guy for Jacob Eason. And, they get the ball to him, create mismatches because he was able to split out wide. He just looks like a buffed up wide receiver. They're bigger receivers, Juwan Johnson, who we'll talk about, and Chase Claypool. They're bigger than this guy. He's going to have to be explosive, like an Evan Engram. He's getting the comparisons to Evan Engram. Evan Engram put up, over 900 yards there for Ole Miss, so it's not, too big of a stretch in terms of the production. But can he be explosive? Can he run that 4.6 40 that we saw out of Evan Engram? And if he's not showing off that speed, I don't think it's going to translate at the next level, at least in terms of some of that draft stock. I look at Josiah DeGuara out of Cincinnati. He's 6'3", 240. He's not the biggest guy, but he just gets the job done. He's a tremendous blocker. I think he's going to be one of those H-back types. He'll probably be a fifth or sixth rounder, but you're going to see Josiah DeGuara. Has really good hands, a weapon over the middle. When we're talking about tight ends who can block, Dalton Keene of Virginia Tech, just 59 catches in his career. Not the most dynamic guy that's going to be out there, but he's one of those who I think is going to be one of the more physical and one of the better blockers that's going to be out there, and that's really going to be his calling card. He'll be a guy that would be, if he gets drafted, it'll be late, but he's going to be one of those guys who I think could end up making a roster because he's really a good blocker. He was Deshaun McClease's lead blocker there for the Hokies. Thaddeus Moss is Randy Moss's son. Great athlete, 6'3", 249. Want to see what he can run. This is another guy who, he's just 6'3". I'm curious to see what the arm length is with him. He's a tremendous pass catcher. The body control is tremendous. Want to see him play with a little bit of power. Is he just going to be a one-dimensional guy that we split out on the outside? Can he really be an inline tight end? That's going to be a big question mark. Albert Owe-Bunam, another guy that you have to worry about from an injury standpoint, played in 9 games in each of his 3 seasons there at Mizzou. Man, he had 11 touchdowns his freshman year, finished his final 2 years with 6 apiece. He was a difference maker, though, for Drew Lock. Before Drew left there after the 2018 season, he was the guy that would get it open up the seam. Tremendous pass catcher. Really want to see what he's going to run in the 40. People are talking about him possibly running in the 4.5s. He's 6'5", 255. That'll definitely keep everybody's attention. But the medicals, and his ability to stay healthy, definitely a concern there. I look at Colby Parkinson out of Stanford, 6'7", 251. I liken him to Levine Toilolo. Levine Toilolo is still playing in the league, by the way. And I look at Colby Parkinson, and he may be a little bit better route runner than Toilolo, but I think Toilolo also has more power to his game than Parkinson. I think Parkinson's a little bit more of a finesse guy, a guy who wants to get out and run routes more so than really be a tremendous blocker. So that's really, that's what's going to be interesting for him. I think he'll probably end up being a late round guy. Jared Pinkney, didn't really talk about him too much. 6'4", 260. Everyone talking about him as a junior, 50 catches, 774 yards, 7 touchdowns. Everyone puts him at the top of their list. And then he disappoints in 2019. Now, we can't put it all on him. The quarterback play really struggled there. Very inconsistent for Derek Mason and company. But, this is a guy who played in 9 games as a freshman, 9 games as a sophomore, and then 8 games as a senior. You worry about that. You worry about some of that durability. And is he going to be a tremendous athlete or not? You really want to see what he's going to run out there. The flip side, you got someone like Steven Sullivan, 6'5", 242, looks like a receiver out there. Not a ton of production there for LSU. Played in just 6 games as a senior, but the athleticism is going to be intriguing. Charlie Tabopeau for Portland State. He's 6'3", 245 pounds, but I look at him as another guy who can be that H-back type, be somebody who can be a good blocker and also catch the football, whether it's splitting him out or as an inline blocker. I think he's someone who's going to run pretty well as well there at the Combine. I'll be excited to see him play. Charlie Werner didn't get much of a chance there at Georgia, 6'5", 245, just 34 catches in his career. But he's somebody who I think showed off when he got a chance, showed off some hands, but I thought he was a really a good blocker there for Georgia. They did a lot of runs for that. Dominic Wood Anderson out of Tennessee, 6'4", 257. He and Werner, not a ton of pass catches, for Wood Anderson, just 38 in his career. But these are 2 guys who are going to be physical blockers. I think Sean McCown out of Michigan is another guy, shows up well as a blocker. A little bit more in terms of the stats from McCown as a sophomore, 31 receptions, but in the final 2 seasons, just 27 combined, 6'5", 246. he'll be one of those blockers that you're going to be looking at. Mitchell Wilcox out of South Florida, 6'5", 245, 100 catches in his career, 11 touchdowns. A guy who I think could be a weapon up the seam, but he's one of those guys that I kind of worry about that could get lost in the mix here for this draft. He's really going to have to do something to kind of separate himself and really show people that he is draftable. And then for Cheyenne, CJ O'Grady, 6'4", 256 there out of Arkansas. A guy who showed that he can be a weapon up the seam, but I worry about him from an off-field standpoint. So I think the interviews for him are going to be critical. Teams are going to have to really see if this is a guy who has learned from his mistakes. Can he really improve, and show out there at the next level? Stay, and really stay out of trouble. Devin Asiasi for UCLA, 6'3", 279. To me, he was one of those guys. I didn't see enough. I saw some flashes, but I really would have rather seen Noah Togiai out of Oregon State get invited to the combine than really Asiasi. But Devin was a guy who was a junior and came out, so they're giving him the opportunity. I just look at him. I didn't see enough to really say, yeah, he's going to get drafted. The other guy that I worry about is Jacob Breland out of Oregon. 6'5", 250, another guy from the medicals, tore up his knee, having a great senior season too. In just 6 games, 26 receptions, 405, and 6 touchdowns. Man, he was one of Justin Herbert's favorite targets, and he was showing off some pretty good explosiveness. The question is going to be how is he going to rebound off of that knee? I think he still gets drafted. I think he's going to get drafted late, probably a 7th round pick. Someone will take usually a late round pick on him. But he could, if that knee holds up and the medicals come back and he's able to get back to some of that form, some of the explosiveness, then, you may have something there. Remember, Rob Gronkowski, as a 2nd round pick from Arizona to the Patriots, he was hurt for the majority of that year. And so he didn't get to really participate in any of the drills. So he was kind of an unknown in some respects. So he still was able to get there to the next level, showed off that he is, that he was healthy, and ultimately is going to go down as a first ballot Hall of Famer, more than likely there at the tight end position. So that's the tight ends. We're going to go ahead and now focus on the receivers for the remainder of this podcast, because we've got 55 receivers in this year's draft class. If we look at last year's draft class, we had a total of 48 that were invited to the combine. 28 of those guys were drafted. 28 total receivers were drafted, and 24 of them came from the combine. So the only 4 that weren't invited, Juwan Winfrey of Colorado. Then these guys were drafted in the 6th and 7th round. Marcus Green out of Louisiana Monroe, Scotty Miller out of Bowling Green, and John Ursua out of Hawaii. These were guys who, obviously, group of 5 guys, but with the exception of Winfrey, but guys that didn't go to the combine, didn't really make a name for themselves, but guys who were really good football players. Marcus Green was somebody who I thought in the return game at ULM, a smaller receiver, same thing with Scotty Miller, there at Bowling Green, one of those guys, you're trying to find the next Cole Beasley. And so you look at 2 of those guys, hey, that could potentially be that fit. John Ursua was a weapon there at Hawaii, got injured, comes back, and was one of the nation's leading receivers. And then Juwan Winfrey, I got to watch him play against USC and live, and they're in Boulder. And this was a guy who could get vertical on you. So you can absolutely, these were guys who, you're trying to fill a need at the receiver position, because you don't want to have 5 of the exact same receiver in your wide receiver room. You want to have some of that variety, and I think that's really what teams were looking at when they were drafting those guys. They weren't the bigger names, but they were all guys who could potentially contribute, and those guys stuck around on the rosters. And that's one of the things that is going to be interesting to see with this year's draft class. Who's ultimately going to be targeted? Now, obviously, you're talking about Marquise Brown and N'Keal Harry in round number 1, but then, man, it's hard to believe, Devontae Adams fell all the way to round number 2, but you have Deebo Samuel and AJ Brown coming off the board next. Mecole Hardman there in round number 2. DK Metcalf fell to 64 overall to Seattle. Terry McLaurin was in the 3rd round. It's really, Hunter Renfrow for Oakland and Darius Slayton to the Giants in round number 5. Those were steals. So you look at the draft class. Olabisi Johnson was the last receiver taken, number 247 overall, made an impact there for the Vikings. So these receivers, they can come on at any point. But when you're talking about who's draftable and some of the guys that weren't drafted, some of these guys that, just, there were question marks. They're guys that, they weren't complete receivers. You have Felton Davis was battling some injuries. Jamal Custis, really more of a one-trick pony getting vertical. Emmanuel Brown from Northern Arizona didn't really separate himself as an athlete. Tyree Brady, really kind of, coming out of Marshall, ran a 4.74 at his pro day. Not all that spectacular. Greg Dortch was really a short guy. Keelan Doss didn't get drafted. Kind of surprising, but Oakland ultimately brought him on. You saw him at the as part of Hard Knocks. Wound up making his way back onto the roster after the whole fiasco with Antonio Brown. Lil Jordan Humphrey, man, if you run a 4.7, 4.75 as a receiver, that's kind of almost the kiss of death. There were surprises. Jacoby Myers out of NC State, he ran a 4.63, and ultimately New England picks him up as a free agent, and he was able to show out pretty well for them. So you look at the receiver class, some of the guys that didn't really separate themselves, they're just kind of a guy that were out there, they didn't get drafted. So when you look at this year's draft class, obviously we talk receivers. You have to talk about CeeDee Lamb at the top, along with Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs, Laviska Shenault, T. Higgins, Jalen Reagor. Those are going to be names, and Justin Jefferson. Those are names that obviously you're going to want to watch. You're going to want to see who's going to be the fastest in terms of the 40s. You can expect that Henry Ruggs is probably going to run the fastest of the bunch. Is John Ross's 40 time, that 4.22, is that going to be in jeopardy here? That's a big question mark. With Ruggs, I think Jalen Reagor, I think he's actually going to show up and be quicker than he is fast. I don't think he's going to be the fastest, one of the faster 40 times. I could be wrong, but I think he's quicker than fast. I think he demonstrates that with his elusiveness. But you're going to see him just juking guys all over the place. It's going to be a lot of fun. Jerry Jeudy, I think, can get vertical, but he's really going to show up well with his route running ability. That's going to be a lot of fun to watch there. CeeDee Lamb, here's the thing. To really solidify yourself as a top 10 pick, you want to try to break that 4.5 barrier. When you're talking about these bigger receivers, Mike Evans was the one guy that didn't break the 4.5 and still ended up being a top 10 pick. So I really wonder with CeeDee Lamb, where he's at. He'll probably run in the 4.53, 4.55 range would be my guess. But if he can break 4.5, I think you're talking about him in the top 10. I think the same really goes for Jeudy. If he can showcase his route running ability at an elite level and then showcase, really the improved hands. He dropped a lot of easy balls, and that's what you didn't see out of a lot of these elite wide receivers. That's what you want to watch. Laviska Shenault, obviously from a medical standpoint, this is a guy who couldn't stay on the field for Colorado. Battled a lot of injuries. Battled through injuries, but it was just one of those things that would limit his effectiveness. Can he run all the routes that you need? They're going to run a lot of different routes. How polished a route runner is he going to be? And then really how fast, can he really separate on the outside? I think he's able to do that. He's been able to showcase, especially when you put him in the backfield, how quickly he can accelerate to his top end speed. Same can't necessarily be said for T. Higgins. Can he separate down the field? What's interesting is Pro Football Focus reported that he caught 15 of his 23 targets, down the field, deep balls, for over 500 yards. So he can get deep. He can create some late separation with his size. But when it counted, especially against LSU, he couldn't really separate from those defensive backs. So that's going to be a concern. I think with Justin Jefferson, he's not the fastest guy in the world, but he's one of those guys, savvy route running, I think is going to be on display. When we talk about guys who aren't all that fast, but great route runners, you're going to see that from Van Jefferson. I think he's very advanced as a route runner there for Florida, the son of Sean Jefferson, the Charger great. James Prochet. This is a guy who could very well have been a third round pick, I think, in most years. But I think he's probably going to fall to round number 5. I think that's probably where I have him coming off the board. And it's really a shame because you look at James Prochet, over 300 receptions in his career, just under 4,000 yards, 39 touchdowns. This guy was explosive for the Mustangs. And I think he's going to make a roster. He'll probably be like the third receiver, play out of the slot, and excellent body control. He's somebody who I think can be on a roster for a long time. A lot of people love Donovan Peoples-Jones and his athleticism. I really want to see it because I didn't always see that out on the football field. A lot of people said, hey, he didn't get the great quarterback play out of Shea Patterson. I didn't see consistency from him. One guy, though, who I did see consistently making plays was Michael Pittman Jr., 6'4", 220. The senior, over 100 catches for SC, 1,275 yards, 11 touchdowns. And what he did to Utah against guys who were going to be at the combine, Jalen Johnson, Julian Blackman, Terrell Burgess, Javelin Guidry, he torched them. And it really wasn't funny. I mean, he'd get deep and there wasn't a ton of separation, but he knows how to go up and high point the football, get some late separation, which a lot of times is more important than anything else. Get that late separation, attack the football in the air, and then he's such a load to bring down. He also showed an ability to really get a good release and beat some guys off the line with his athleticism, with his route running at the Senior Bowl. And I look at USC, and with all the receivers that they have, with Tyler Vaughns and Amon-Ra St. Brown, they have these receivers that they can throw to. Drake London, the talented freshman as well. And teams were really, Washington, playing the deep safeties and everything else. They were really trying to design their defenses to stop Michael Pittman. And that's the thing. If you've got a receiver where the defense is running a defense, running their secondary, running, whether it's, cover 2, whatever it is that they're doing, are they bracketing the receiver? If you're really running a defense to stop one receiver, and they can say all they want, that's really what they were doing. They were trying to take away Michael Pittman Jr. because they were trying to get Tyler Vaughns, Amon-Ra St. Brown to beat him. They didn't want Michael Pittman to be that guy, and he was still dominating, being able to make plays over the middle. To me, he's going to be a second rounder, but I think he's one of those talented receivers. I want to see what he runs at the combine, though, because I think if he can somehow break 4.5, I don't think it's going to happen. I think he'll probably be a mid 4.5 guy. He'll get people talking, as a potential top 40 pick. Brandon Ayuk out of Arizona State, man, 6'1", 206. I want to see what the arm length is going to be. He looks like he's so long. He's a guy who's explosive in space, can make guys miss, but also a vertical threat. 65 receptions, just under 1,200 yards, 18.3 yard per catch average, and then 8 touchdowns. Very explosive guy, in the return game as well. Ran a punt for a touchdown, had 14 punt returns, and had a 16.1 yard per return average, which tells you he's pretty sudden. He can make guys miss in the open field. He's a sleeper for me for the first round. I think he's one of those guys who I think if he has a really good combine or really good individual workouts, he could sneak into round 1. He's one of those sneaky guys, sneaky good receivers. So as we scroll through, we take a look at some of the receivers. Juwan Johnson, I think one of the more physical receivers in this year's draft class. Really want to see what he runs in the 40. I'm really curious to see how explosive he is. I think he's going to be one of the stronger receivers. Plays with a little bit more power. Want to see what he can do as a blocker. Chase Claypool is a monster there at Notre Dame. A big dude, 6'4", 229 pounds. Curious to see what he runs in the 40. I honestly want to see either him or Juwan Johnson, who's even bigger than him. He's 6'5", almost 240. I want to see one of the two of them really get converted to the tight end position. Be the next Darren Waller. You could probably end up being the second, third, possibly fourth receiver on an NFL roster, as a wide receiver. But you move to that tight end position, and I think you got something, especially with those bodies, man. They're big-bodied guys, and they're really, really guys that know how to use their body to their advantage. And I think they'd be just a matchup nightmare for safeties and for linebackers. If you're looking for a guy kind of flying under the radar, how about Quintez Cephas out of Wisconsin? 6'1", 207, the junior. He had to battle back. That's one of the things that was kind of, 2018, was not kind to him. He was, there was an allegation of sexual assault against him. He was exonerated. The school brought him back, and ultimately the football team brought him back onto the roster. And, he had a great year, over 900 yards receiving, 7 touchdowns. His thing, quarterback play struggled at times, but he was someone who, when he got vertical, there were very few guys that could hang with him. So that vertical speed, I really want to see what he runs in the 40. I want to see what the 10-yard split is, because he's one of those more explosive guys who can get to full speed in a hurry. And I think he's somebody that teams are going to be talking about as things go along. Let's see, as we scroll through, there's so many receivers to talk about. Bryan Edwards out of South Carolina, model of consistency. Over 3,000 yards receiving, 234 receptions, 22 touchdowns. Just pretty consistent numbers all the way throughout his career. Going to be curious to see, what type of athlete he is. And Antonio Gandy-Golden there for Liberty. He'll probably end up being a day 3 guy just based on this depth of the draft class, but another 6'4", 220-pound receiver, just smooth on the outside, really a large catch radius, 17.7 yards per reception, went just under 1,400 yards, back-to-back 10 touchdown seasons for Gandy-Golden. He's a guy that, even when he played against top competition, he looked like he belonged. And that's something that, you really want to see. What's he, we talk about the 40 time, and that's not everything, but at the end of the day, when you've got some of these bigger receivers, if they can show off the fact that they can really get down into the low 4.5s or run in the 4.4s, that's going to make teams take notice. Antonio Gibson out of Memphis is one of those guys who can be a receiver. He can be a running back. He was a running back at the Senior Bowl. He's slated to work out with the receivers at the Combine. So the scouts are going to get to see a little bit of everything out of this guy. 38 receptions, 33 carries, also had, 23 punt returns, and finished with 13 total touchdowns. 12 on the offensive side of the ball, 8 as a running the football, and 4 receiving, and then a punt return for touchdown. He's built like a running back. He and Laviska Shenault, both 6'2", around 220 pounds. They look like running backs, at the wide receiver position. Shenault was asked to line up, in the backfield at times, and same with Antonio Gibson. So those are two guys. You'll kind of be comparing the two of them. Teams that they miss on Laviska Shenault in round number 1 could potentially get an Antonio Gibson sitting there in the round 4, round 5, round 6 range. KJ Hamler, 5'9", 176, redshirt sophomore, explosive receiver. But he's one of those guys for me that I'm not as high on him as a lot of other guys. A lot of people are talking about him with his explosiveness. He could potentially be a first rounder, potentially going to Green Bay. I actually have Jalen Reagor ultimately going in round number 1. He's not there currently if you go to my website, but he'll be there in my next iteration of my mock draft. I think Jalen Reagor is somebody who you really can't study his 2019 tape with the poor quarterback play. You look at 2018, and I went back and read my notes and watched some of the game film from 2018. He is an explosive receiver. I think I was giving him too much of a hard time because of, it was ultimately a lot of it was because of the quarterback play. I look at KJ Hamler though, he had Sean Clifford. The two of them were dialed in, and yes, he could separate at times, but some of the contested catches, he would go up. He'd struggle at times, as he'd go up and high point a football. Hands were apart, weren't actually coming together to high point the ball. He's somebody to me that, I look at him, he's so small, he's going to have to play out of the slot. Can't really put him out on the outside. I'm not as high on him, like I said, as some other people are. Devin Duvernay out of Texas. Another guy who I think is going to run really well, 5'11", 210, built really well. He's a shorter guy. He's not over 6 feet, but he's solidly built. 106 receptions, over 1,300 yards, and 10 touchdowns this season with Colin Johnson there. Which, by the way, Colin Johnson, another guy, Johnson & Johnson, between he and Jawan Johnson, I think the two of them really need to consider being tight ends. Colin Johnson, when he came back, yes, people were talking about the athleticism. I want to see, just how much stiffness there is to him. A lot of people are giving Tyler Johnson a hard time. I think that guy really runs slant routes really well, attacks the middle of the field. But is he anything more than a 5th-round receiver, especially in this draft class? 6'2", 205. He's going to have to show that he's a tremendous athlete. Back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons there for the Gophers. But is he an athlete? Is he a tremendous athlete? That's the thing that's a big question mark that you're going to have. Denzel Mims, though, he has an opportunity to be a day 2 guy. He's 6'3", 215, over 1,000 yards in 2017 and again in 2019. Had 28 touchdowns in 3 seasons there for the Baylor Bears. But the senior look, in the Senior Bowl, I thought that, the flair for the acrobatic catches, just diving for balls, high pointing footballs, making catches in the back end zone with body control, getting his feet down before he goes out. He's one of those guys who's going to be a sleeper in this draft class. KJ Hill out of Ohio State, he'll be probably a day 3 guy, probably a 4th, 5th round guy. Reminds me a lot of Terry McLaurin with his route running ability. Somebody who ran a lot of underneath routes for the Buckeyes, but somebody who I think, Terry McLaurin, I think is a good comp for him. Let's see, Malcolm Perry out of Navy, the Naval Academy. This is a guy who's going to have to get used to being a receiver, but he's 5'9", 190 pounds, over 4,000 yards on the ground, 40 touchdowns as a runner. Played some receiver, but really he's going to have to show that he can be a pass catcher. He's running with the receivers. I think there's a chance that Malcolm Perry, if nothing else, be on the practice squad, really be a developmental guy, but could end up being a slot receiver at the next level. He has some of that explosiveness. Speaking of explosiveness, Joe Reed. Man, look at all these receivers. It's crazy. 6'1", 215. And a guy, what really jumps out to you is his return ability. The kickoff returns, 5 return for touchdown. I mentioned he was weighs 215, very powerful after the catch as well. So he has some elusiveness to him, has really good power. He's a guy that I think can end up making a name for himself. I keep scrolling through the list, and there's some guys that I'm questioning why they came out. I want to see what Quez Watkins does for South Carolina. Over 1,100 yards, 6'2", 190. But can he really separate himself? Can he really prove that he belongs? Cody White of Michigan State is going to have to really, that if he put on the game tape against Ohio State where he couldn't separate from Okuda, what do you think is going to happen at the next level? He's somebody who's really going to have to separate himself from these guys, find a way to do that. Jeff Thomas out of Miami, just 5'10", 174. Terrible quarterback play there for the Hurricanes, but a guy, he was a vertical threat. He was going to run pretty well, but he's going to have to, again, separate himself, show that he can make some of the catches down the field and be a dynamic receiver. Kendrick Rogers, to me, 6'3", 204 from Texas A&M, the junior, another guy, he played in just 23 games in 3 years there for the Aggies. Wasn't always on the field, disappeared a lot of times during the games. He's probably going to be a pretty good athlete. He's going to show off some athleticism, some leaping grabs, but I'm not so sure there. KJ Osborne out of Miami, transferred from Buffalo to Miami, and didn't have quite the statistical season that he had as a junior there, catching passes from Tyree Jackson. But, he's one of those leaders. I think he stepped into a role there. He's somebody that I think at least keep an eye on him. I think he's somebody who, if he can run well, teams are going to look at him as probably a midday 3 guy when it's all said and done. Continuing scrolling through our wide receivers before we come to an end here. Tristan Jackson for Syracuse. There's a Syracuse receiver last year, and Jamal Custis. He was a senior. Tristan Jackson transferred from Michigan State to Syracuse, played in just 1 game in 2018. 2019, 1,000-yard receiver. Boom, enters the draft. He's a vertical threat, a guy who can get down the field, but can he do anything else? That's going to be a big question mark there. He's going to have to really demonstrate, his knowledge of, a lot of the different route running. Then you look at Isaiah Hodgins out of Oregon State. He's 6'4", 209, junior, 86 catches, 1,171 yards, 13 touchdowns. Had a really good quarterback, Jake Luton, throwing the football to him there for the Beavers and Jonathan Smith's offense. What type of athlete is he? Is he somebody who... he made some catches down the field. I thought a lot of them were in the red zone. I thought a lot of them were, a lot of the 50-50 balls. I don't know that he can necessarily separate down the field, and that's going to be the question. That's going to limit some of his draft stock. He's going to have to really prove that he can be a dynamic receiver. I look at some of these guys like John Hightower of Boise State, Stephen Guidry of Mississippi State. I don't know that these are Aaron Fuller of Washington. They have their moments, but I just don't know that they're going to be guys that can really make an impact at the next level. I think there's some other receivers that are more explosive. I look at Chris Fink out of Notre Dame. He'll be an intriguing guy, 5'10", 184 pounds. He's just a tough receiver, man. He's somebody who can play in the slot. And that's one of the things, talking about some of those other receivers, I think Fuller could probably play out of the slot as well. Fink, his toughness is what kind of jumps out to me. Aaron Fuller, his hands, making some one-handed grabs there for Washington. Stephen Guidry, 6'4", 200. So he has some size to him. John Hightower, actually, a decent return guy, returning kicks there for Boise State, returned 1 for a touchdown in 2019. 51 grabs, 943 yards, and 8 touchdowns this season. Really a go-to guy at that quarterback position with Hank Bachmeier and Jalen Henderson. A lot of question marks there. Still able to produce, even though he had some questionable quarterback. Really who was throwing the football to him week in and week out. So I think the savviness there of John Hightower, I think could get him drafted late. So that'll be interesting. Courtney Davis. I think some of the route running, jumps out to you a little bit there for Texas A&M, 6'2", 200 pounds, the junior. And then Gabriel Davis out of UCF, very intriguing, 6'3", 207, could potentially be a day 2 guy, 72 receptions, over 1,200 yards, 12 touchdowns on the year, over 17 yards per reception under his belt. He's an interesting guy. He's a big target. He was a guy who can get vertical. A red zone option, can high point the football. He's one of those big guys, he's like a Michael Pittman type, and you just worry that he's going to get lost in the shuffle. I hope that doesn't happen. I hope that he shows up pretty well at the combine. Man, don't run in that 4.6 range. Run in that low 4.5, possibly even break 4.5. Get into the 4.4s. That's really what you want to have next to your name when you're scrolling through and looking at some of these. That's going to be what you really want to see. And I think he's going to be able to do that because he was able to get down the football field with regularity for UCF. Lawrence Cager out of Georgia, a big guy, 6'5", 220 pounds. He really showed that he was a weapon there for Jake Fromm. He could potentially get some interest late on day 3. And then the guy that's really interesting and a guy who has a chance to be a day 2 guy, probably a 3rd rounder, is Lynn Bowden Jr. out of Kentucky, the junior, 6'1", 199. And look, as a receiver, over 1,300 yards receiving, this past season, though, with the quarterback situation, all the injuries at quarterback, as the receiver, he was asked to transition and really be a quarterback. And the quarterback position, look, he struggled with his accuracy, just 47% completion percentage, but over 1,400 yards running the football, 13 touchdowns, 7.9 yards per carry, dynamic with the football in his hands. You think of guys like Antoine Randall L. Transitioning to the receiver position, even Julian Edelman, at Kent State, moved over to the receiver position. I think Lynn Bowden Jr., the athleticism, the versatility, you can do a lot of things, especially in this year's, in this day and age at the in the NFL level, with what Taysom Hill has been able to do there with the Saints. I think you can do a lot of creative things with Lynn Bowden Jr. He's one of those intriguing picks, and you're curious to see just how fast he is. And so that's going to be fun to watch. And then finally, the last guy that I want to kind of end with is Omar Bayless out of Arkansas State, 6'3", 207, 93 catches, over 1,600 yards, 17.8 yards per reception, and 17 touchdowns. He's one of the best receivers and nobody's talking about. He has a large, has a large catch radius, but he struggles, I think, at times with some of the easier passes, and he'll drop some easy balls. And that's really concerning in terms of, some of that concentration, being able to haul in passes. But, he's a big guy, has long arms, and a guy who can make plays down the football field. And, he's somebody who I hope that he runs well, because he's one of those guys from a group of 5 school. You really want to see him perform well at the combine to really get things jump started for him, especially leading into his individual workouts. That's really what's going to springboard things. You really want people talking about you. And if you're a 6'3" guy running sub 4.5, that's really going to, have teams take notice. I keep talking about that. There aren't too many guys that run sub 4.5 with that size. So if we look at the at the receiver position, and you're talking about some of these receivers and what they ran, it doesn't necessarily translate. Northwestern State's Jazz Ferguson at 6'5", 227, ran a 4.4, 540, didn't get drafted. But you look at, let's see, Miles Boykin out of Notre Dame, really shot up draft boards, went to the Ravens, 6'4", 220, ran a 4.4, 240. DK Metcalf, Terry McLaurin, running in the 4.3 range. Darius Slayton ran a 4.39, and you really see what he's been able to do. Mecole Hardman ran a 4.33. Paris Campbell, battling injuries, ran a 4.31. So the draft class didn't necessarily mean a whole lot, but you look at Deebo Samuel, 4.48, so sub 4.5. AJ Brown, sub 4.5, running a 4.49. The guy that I really wanted to see play for the Cardinals was Hakeem Butler, 6'5", 227, runs a 4.48, drafted in the 4th round, and ultimately was on IR. He's someone to keep an eye out for next season for the Cardinals. But BC Johnson, 4.51. N'Keal Harry, 4.53. Deontay Johnson going to Pittsburgh, 4.53. So those were all receivers that were drafted, running right in that low 4.5 range, like I mentioned. As I scrolled down, some of the other guys, Hunter Renfrow just running a 4.59, but he was a slot guy and he's more shifty than anything else. Let's see. Riley Ridley got drafted, hasn't really done much, ran a 4.58. The receiver that ran the slowest at the combine who got drafted was Keyshawn Johnson from Fresno State, ran a 4.6. And anybody that ran slower than a 4.6, there were 5 of them didn't get drafted. You did have Arcega Whiteside run a 4.49 at his pro days at 6'2", 225. Hard to argue with that. Jalen Hurd ended up getting drafted despite, at 6'5", 226, despite running, 4.66, still got himself drafted. We never did get to see Marquise Brown run, but we knew what he could do out on the football field. That's why I'm hoping that Henry Ruggs Jr. gets to run. You want to see some of these explosive receivers and see what they can do in the 40. You see what happens with John Ross, what he was able to do. So last year's draft class, obviously you can't really compare everything to this year's draft class, completely different draft class, but I just wanted some takeaways. You can kind of look at last year's draft class and how things played out, from a draftability standpoint. So it's kind of easy, at least from that standpoint, to look at this year's draft class and kind of pontificate and really kind of, try to determine where they're all going to go and what that all looks like. And, history repeating itself, studying the history of the draft and really getting a better understanding of these types of players, where they're going to go, and then ultimately where the best fit is going to be for them, what their skill set, what they bring to the table, who fits into the right organization, and really what their offenses are trying to do. That's really what you try to do when you're studying the draft, studying each individual draft class. So that's the receiving core. That's really the end of all of the offense. So we've gone through our entire offensive class, 174 total players. We talked about most of the players in this podcast. We're coming up on 2 hours. Hope you've enjoyed all the content. I've enjoyed bringing this to you. As I mentioned, we've got some defensive players that we'll be talking about in next week's podcast. 151 of them to be exact, along with about 12 special teams players that we'll go ahead and cover. That'll get you ready. We'll have all 337 players, or the majority of them. We'll have talked about them in some capacity on this podcast. That'll really get you prepared for the combine, which will be run the following week. And then after the combine is run, we'll have our post-combine edition and really go through who excelled, who really rose to the occasion, who in these offensive draft classes, who were the guys that really set themselves apart, who really have some of those question marks, who's going to be that Elijah Holyfield who just runs slower than anybody ever expected, who's going to be some of those guys who run faster than you were expecting to see and really have to send you back to watch the game film. Who were the quarterbacks that really stepped up and played well? Who really kind of shied away? Can Steven Montez and Shea Patterson, make an impact or not? Who are going to be the top guys that are going to run the 40? Are we going to see Henry Ruggs, Laviska Shenault? Are we going to see Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Reagor, CeeDee Lamb run at the receiver position? Are the running backs all going to be doing the same thing? And running. Are we going to see Joe Burrow throw? What are the medicals going to look like for some of these guys? That's really when things start happening. And once we have the combine and we have a lot of those numbers, then we can really start analyzing things. Obviously, you're going to have free agency after that and really figure out what the team needs are going to be during the free agent process. Try to predict. I missed on the Bucs, with Devin White. I had him going through the majority of my mock drafts, and then the Bucs started signing a bunch of linebackers in free agency. And I said, you know what? Why would they sign all these linebackers and then turn around and sign Devin White? So I made the change, messed that up, and ultimately what they do, they took Devin White, number 5 overall. So have to trust my gut, my initial instinct on a lot of these team moves. But we'll go ahead and go through where teams are, draft needs. We'll also break down each of the positions and who's going where, and where I see them going in the draft as well. So a lot to cover over the next couple of months. That's getting us ready for the NFL Draft, set to begin April 23rd, Las Vegas, Nevada, with the Bellagio fountains as the backdrop. Can't wait to see how they're going to pull this one off. They're going to put the stage apparently in the fountain, potentially sending a boat out or having the players walk across a bridge. I don't know if they're going to be able to pull that off or not, but it'd be really, really cool if they could. So with that said, I hope everybody enjoys their weekend. This is a holiday weekend. Some of you may not be working on Monday, President's Day weekend. We'll do this all again next week. So for readyforthedraft.com, this has been the Ready for the Draft podcast, pre-combine edition covering the offense. I've been your host, Gregg Schutze. Until then, everyone, take care, and I am out of here.